In the summer of 1892, Montana heat didn't simmer, it scorched. The Harrison Ranch sat sprawling and dust-worn at the base of the Bitterroot Mountains, 50,000 acres of hard ground and harder lessons. Margaret Chen stepped off the afternoon stage with one carpet bag, a teaching certificate from Philadelphia, and a secret that sat heavy as stone in her chest. She'd come west not to find herself, but to lose the woman everyone expected her to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The advertisement had been simple. School teacher needed, room and board provided, remote location, strong constitution required. Margaret had answered within the hour. Philadelphia had become suffocating. The pitying glances from her mother's church friends, the concerned questions from her sisters, the well-meaning introductions to widowers and bachelor cousins who all wanted the same thing she couldn't give them. So she'd packed light, bought a ticket west, and left behind a fiancé who'd called her broken when she'd finally told him the truth. The stage driver pointed toward a general store with peeling paint. "Hoskins runs the post. He'll know where Harrison's place is." Then he clicked his tongue, and the horses lurched forward, leaving her in a cloud of grit that tasted like regret and freedom in equal measure. Inside the store, a wiry man with spectacles perched on a sunburned nose looked up from a ledger. "Help you, miss." "I'm Margaret Chen. I'm expected at the Harrison Ranch." Hoskins set down his pencil. "You're the new school teacher?" "Yes." He studied her for a moment, taking in her city dress, her smooth hands, her straight posture. "It's 8 miles northeast. Road's rough. You'll want a horse." "I can ride." "Didn't say you couldn't." He wiped his hands on his apron. "Just making sure you know what you're getting into. Ben Harrison's got 6 kids out there. Lost his wife 3 years back to fever. Oldest boy is 14. Youngest is 5. None of them have seen the inside of a classroom in over a year." Margaret nodded. She'd expected children. That part didn't frighten her. "Ben's a good man," Hoskins continued, "but he's buried himself in that ranch. Works dawn to dusk. Those kids raise themselves more than he raises them." He paused. "Last teacher lasted 4 months. Why did she leave?" "Said it was too isolated, too hard, too much." Hoskins pulled a key from a hook. "Stable's out back. Take the mare, second stall. She's gentle. Follow the north road past the Miller property. You'll see the fence line, then turn east when you hit the creek. Can't miss it." Margaret paid for a canteen and a small bundle of dried apples. When she stepped into the stable, the mare huffed warm breath and pushed her nose into Margaret's palm. "You and me both," Margaret whispered. "New start." The ride took 2 hours. The land stretched wide and golden, punctuated by sage and the occasional cottonwood. The mountains loomed to the west, their peaks still holding snow even in July. The air tasted clean, empty of coal smoke and crowded streets. Margaret felt something loosen in her chest, not relief exactly, but space, room to breathe without explaining herself. The Harrison Ranch appeared gradually, rising from the land like it had grown there. A 2-story house with a wraparound porch, weathered but sturdy. A barn with red paint fading to rust. Corrals stretching out in geometric patterns. Chickens scratching in the dirt. Laundry hanging motionless on a line, and everywhere, dust. It coated the fence posts, the windows, the boots lined up outside the door. A boy emerged from the barn, tall and lean with dark hair falling into his eyes. He stopped when he saw her, hand resting on a pitchfork handle. Margaret dismounted. "I'm looking for Mr. Harrison." The boy studied her with unsettling directness. "You're the teacher." "I am. Margaret Chen. Caleb Harrison." He didn't move to shake her hand. "Pa's in the south pasture." "Won't be back till sunset." "I see." Margaret glanced toward the house. "Is there someone I should speak to in the meantime?" Caleb shifted his weight. "Just us. I'll show you the schoolhouse." He led her past the main house to a smaller building set back near a grove of aspens. Inside, dust motes swirled in shafts of sunlight. Desks sat in uneven rows, some child-sized, others clearly built for older students. A chalkboard hung crooked on the far wall. Books lined a single shelf, their spines cracked and faded. "We don't use it much anymore," Caleb said. "But needed us working." Margaret set her bag on the teacher's desk. "How many of you are there?" "6, I'm the oldest." "Then there's Annie. She's 12. The twins, Luke and Grace, they're 9. My brother Sam is 7. And Rosie's the baby. She just turned 5. And your father manages the ranch alone?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "We help. I didn't mean, we do fine." He turned toward the door. "There's a room off the back of the house. Pa said you'd stay there. I'll bring your bag over." Before she could respond, he was gone, boots kicking up dust as he strode back toward the barn. Margaret stood in the empty schoolhouse, running her finger along a desktop carved with initials and dates. 1889, 1890, evidence of children who'd once filled these seats, back when there'd been a mother to make sure they came. She walked back toward the main house. The door stood open, and from inside came the sound of voices, high and argumentative. "I'm not wearing that. It smells like the barn." "Everything smells like the barn, Grace. Just put it on. Why do I have to look nice for some teacher?" "She's probably old and mean." Margaret paused at the threshold, then knocked firmly on the doorframe. Silence. A girl appeared. 12, Margaret guessed, with wheat-colored braids and a face smudged with flour. "Oh, you're here. I'm Margaret Chen." The girl wiped her hands on her apron. "Annie Harrison. Sorry about the mess. We didn't know exactly when you'd come." "It's all right." Behind Annie, 4 more faces appeared, 2 identical ones with matching freckles, a boy with serious eyes and dirt on his knees, and a small girl clutching a wooden horse. "That's Luke and Grace," Annie said, pointing to the twins. "Sam and Rosie." Margaret smiled at them. "It's nice to meet you all." Rosie stepped forward, horse still in hand. "Are you going to make us do sums?" "Among other things." "I don't like sums. Most people don't," Margaret said. "But they're useful." Grace crossed her arms. "Caleb said you're from the city, Philadelphia. Why'd you leave?" Margaret hesitated. The truth sat waiting, too complicated, too raw. "I wanted to see the mountains," Luke snorted. "That's a dumb reason." "Luke!" Annie shot him a look. "It's all right," Margaret said. "Maybe it is, but here I am." Annie smoothed her apron. "Your room's this way." The room was small but clean, a bed with a quilt, a washstand, a single window looking out toward the mountains. "Someone had left wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. Pa said to make you comfortable," Annie explained. "I did the best I could. It's perfect." "Thank you." Annie lingered in the doorway. "Do you really know how to teach all ages?" "Caleb reads at university level, but Rosie just learned her letters." "I do. And you won't leave?" The question landed with unexpected weight. Margaret met the girl's eyes. "I signed a year contract. I'll honor it." Annie nodded slowly. "The last teacher said that too." Then she was gone, leaving Margaret alone with her carpet bag and the fading light. She unpacked slowly. 3 dresses, practical and dark. A few books. Writing paper. The daguerreotype she'd almost left behind, showing her with her family in front of their Philadelphia brownstone. Her mother's face smiled out from the frame, frozen in a moment before disappointment had set in. Margaret set it face down in the drawer. Through the window, she watched the sun sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and rose. Somewhere a cow lowed. Chickens settled into their roost. The land breathed evening into being, and Margaret breathed with it. She heard him before she saw him, boots on the porch, the creak of the door. A voice low and tired calling out, "Annie, what's for supper?" Margaret smoothed her dress and stepped into the hallway. The man stood in the kitchen, hat in hand, dust coating his shoulders. He was tall, broad across the chest, with dark hair graying at the temples and lines carved deep around his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into sun and worry in equal measure. He looked older than she'd expected, worn down. Hued up, he saw her and froze. "Mr. Harrison," Margaret said. "I'm Margaret Chen." He stared at her for a beat too long, then seemed to remember himself. "Ben Harrison." He set his hat on the table. "You made it." "I did." "Good." He glanced around the kitchen at the children gathered near the stove, at Annie stirring something in a pot, at the table set with mismatched plates. "You settled in all right?" "Yes, your daughter was very helpful." Ben nodded, but his attention had already shifted. "Caleb, get the fence mended." "Yes, sir," Caleb called from the next room. "Luke, you feed the horses?" "Yes, sir." Ben washed his hands in the basin, methodical and thorough. When he turned back, his eyes found Margaret again, and this time they lingered. "You look younger than I expected." "I'm 26. City girl?" "Yes." "Ever lived on a ranch before?" "No." He dried his hands on a towel, his expression unreadable. "This isn't Philadelphia, Miss Chen. Out here things are harder, simpler. We don't have time for niceties." "I understand. Do you?" He hung the towel on a hook. "Because the last teacher came with a lot of ideas about how things should be. Lasted 4 months before she decided the wilderness wasn't for her." Margaret met his gaze, steady. "I'm not the last teacher." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or doubt. "We'll see." Annie set bowls on the table. "Supper's ready." They ate in near silence. Stew with tough beef and potatoes. Bread that was more function than flavor. The children kept their heads down, focused on their food. Ben sat at the head of the table, present but distant, his mind clearly somewhere else, on broken fences or sick cattle, or the 100 tasks that would be waiting at dawn. Margaret ate slowly, observing, the way Caleb watched his father, the way Annie served everyone before herself, the way the younger children had learned not to ask for attention. This wasn't a family, not anymore. It was a collection of people surviving in proximity. After supper, Ben stood. "Caleb, come with me. Need to check on that heifer." He looked at Margaret. "School starts at 8. Don't let them fool you into thinking otherwise." Then he was gone, door closing behind him, leaving Margaret with 6 children and a stack of dirty dishes. Annie started clearing plates. Margaret stood. "Let me help." "You don't have to." "I know." They worked side by side at the wash basin, Annie scrubbing, Margaret drying. Through the window, the last light bled from the sky. "He's not usually rude," Annie said quietly. "Pa, he's just tired." "I imagine he is. He loved our mother. When she died, something in him died too." Annie handed her a dripping plate. "He keeps everything running, but he's not really here anymore." "You know?" Margaret dried the plate carefully. "I know." That night, lying in the narrow bed with moonlight slanting across the floor, Margaret pressed her hand to her stomach. Flat, empty, incapable. In Philadelphia, that inability had defined her, had ended her engagement, had turned her into an object of pity. But here, in this room that smelled of sage and pine, with the sound of the wind moving through the aspens, and a house full of children who needed teaching, not mothering, here, maybe that inability didn't matter. Maybe here, she could be enough just as she was. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. Dreamless and deep, morning came sharp and unforgiving. Margaret woke to the sound of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. The house was already alive with movement. Footsteps overhead, water being pumped, the clatter of pans in the kitchen. She dressed quickly in a practical grey dress and pinned her dark hair into a tight bun. When she entered the kitchen, Annie was frying eggs while Rosie sat on the floor playing with her wooden horse. The other children were conspicuously absent. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "They're doing chores," Annie explained without being asked. "Pa has them on rotation. Everyone works before breakfast. What should I do?" Annie glanced up surprised. "You're the teacher. You don't have to." "I'm also living here. Put me in the rotation." A small smile crossed Annie's face. "Caleb feeds the horses. Luke and Grace handle the chickens. Sam pumps water. I cook." She paused. "You could help me, I suppose." "If you know how, I can learn." They worked together in companionable silence. Margaret proved competent with the knife, less so with the temperamental stove. Annie showed her how to adjust the flue, how to judge the heat by holding her hand above the surface. "My mother taught me," Annie said softly. "Before she got sick, we'd make bread together every Saturday. She'd let me knead the dough even though I always made a mess. Her hands stilled. I can't remember her voice anymore. Isn't that strange? I remember what she looked like, what she smelled like, lavender and wood smoke, but her voice is just gone. Margaret set down the knife. My father died when I was 8. I remember his laugh, but not his speaking voice. Memory keeps what it wants, I think, not always what we need. Annie looked at her with something like recognition. Then the door burst open, and the children flooded in, bringing cold air and noise. Ben followed last, brushing dirt from his sleeves. His eyes swept the kitchen, landed briefly on Margaret, then moved away. Everyone sit. Breakfast was efficient. Eggs, yesterday's bread, weak coffee. Ben ate, standing up, one eye on the window. Miss Chen, he said without looking at her, the children are yours from 8 to noon. After that they have work. Understood. Caleb may need to miss some days during roundup. We'll manage. He finally looked at her then, a long, measuring glance. See that you do. Then he was gone again. Boots heavy on the porch steps. At 8 o'clock, Margaret stood in the schoolhouse doorway and rang the bell, a small brass one that produced a surprisingly clear tone. The children came slowly, reluctantly. Caleb arrived last, still wearing his work gloves. Please take your seats, Margaret said. They arranged themselves with telling gaps, Caleb in the back row as far from the teacher's desk as possible, Annie in the middle, with a protective eye on her younger siblings. The twins sat together whispering. Sam picked at a scab on his elbow. Rosie swung her legs, her feet not touching the floor. Margaret surveyed them. 6 children, 6 different levels, 6 separate worlds of need. I'm not here to waste your time, she began. I know you have work to do. I know some of you don't see the point of school. But your father hired me, and I take that seriously. So here's how this will work. She moved to the chalkboard and wrote 6 names in a column. Each of you will have individual work suited to your level. You'll also have group lessons where we learn together. If you finish your work early and finish it well, you may leave early. If you don't finish, you stay until you do. Luke raised his hand. What if we don't care about finishing? Then you'll spend a lot of time in this room. Grace leaned forward. The last teacher gave us sweets when we did good work. I don't have sweets, but I have books. Margaret gestured to the shelf. Real books. Stories from around the world. You earn them by showing me you can think. Caleb spoke from the back, voice flat. We don't need books. We need to know how to keep cattle alive and fences mended. You need both, Margaret said. Your father runs a business. That requires arithmetic, record-keeping, contracts, negotiation. If you can't read or calculate, someone will eventually cheat you. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not agreement, but consideration. Margaret spent the morning assessing them. Caleb, as advertised, read flawlessly and possessed a sharp mathematical mind. He simply saw no purpose for it. Annie had a natural gift for language, but lacked confidence. The twins were clever and competitive, each trying to outpace the other. Sam was dyslexic, she realized within 10 minutes, letters swimming on the page in a way that frustrated him to tears. And Rosie? Rosie was 5 and feral, more comfortable with animals than people. At noon, Margaret released them. They scattered like birds, racing toward the house or the barn or anywhere that wasn't a desk, all except Sam. He sat hunched over his slate, tears making clean tracks through the dust on his face. Margaret approached slowly. Sam! I can't do it. His voice was small, ashamed. The letters won't stay still. She knelt beside his desk. May I see? He showed her his work. Letters backward, words jumbled, effort clear in every shaky line. You're not stupid, Margaret said quietly. Your brain just works differently. And that's not wrong, it's just different. Pa says I'm not trying hard enough. Your father is wrong. The words came out sharper than she intended. You're trying harder than anyone. You're just fighting a battle no one else can see. Sam looked at her with desperate hope. Can you fix it? I can teach you ways to manage it. It won't be easy, but you're not alone anymore. He wiped his nose with his sleeve. Promise. Promise. That afternoon, Margaret walked the property, learning its boundaries. The ranch sprawled endlessly, pastures, outbuildings, a creek that ran silver in the sunlight. She found Ben near the cattle pens, shirtless in the heat, wrestling with a section of fence. She stopped at a respectful distance. "Mr. Harrison." He looked up, sweat gleaming on his shoulders. "Something wrong?" "I wanted to discuss Sam." His expression closed. "Sam's fine. He's struggling with reading. I believe he's lazy." Ben drove a post into the ground with unnecessary force. "Needs to apply himself. He's not lazy. He's dyslexic." "He's what?" "Dyslexic. It's a condition where the brain processes written language differently. It's not a lack of intelligence or effort. With proper teaching methods, he just needs to try harder." Ben straightened, jaw set. "I don't have time for fancy city theories, Miss Chen. Out here, you either do the work or you don't." Margaret felt heat rise in her chest. "So you'd rather let him believe he's stupid?" "I'd rather he learn the world isn't going to make special accommodations. He's 7 years old, and in 11 years he'll be running this ranch. Better he learn now that life is hard and excuses don't matter." They stared at each other across the dusty ground, two people separated by more than distance. "With respect, Mr. Harrison," Margaret said carefully, "you hired me to teach your children. Let me do that. I hired you to teach them reading and sums, not to psychoanalyze them. Education is more than memorization, and parenting is more than coddling." He picked up his hammer. "Sam will be fine." "They all will. They just need structure and discipline. They need someone to see them." Ben's hand tightened on the hammer handle. For a moment something raw flashed across his face. Grief, maybe, or guilt. Then it was gone, locked away behind stone. "Stick to your job, Miss Chen. I'll handle mine." He turned back to the fence. Dismissing her, Margaret walked away, frustration coiling in her stomach. But beneath it something else, a growing understanding of the man. He wasn't cruel. He was drowning. And he'd convinced himself that the only way to survive was to keep moving, keep working, never stop long enough to feel the weight of what he'd lost. That evening at supper, the tension lingered. Ben ate in silence, mechanical and distant. The children had learned to match his mood, eating quietly. Asking nothing, Margaret watched them, these half-orphaned children who'd learned to make themselves small. "Rosie," she said suddenly. Tell me about your horse." Rosie's head snapped up. "Thunder? Is that his name?" "Her name. She's a girl horse." Rosie clutched the wooden toy. "Uncle Caleb made her for me before Mama died." Ben's fork stopped midway to his mouth. "She's beautiful," Margaret said. "Does she have adventures?" And Rosie, starved for attention, began to talk. About Thunder's bravery, about imaginary races through clouds, about a kingdom where horses ruled and people served them gladly. The other children began to relax. Luke added details to Rosie's story. Grace corrected him. Sam laughed. Even Caleb, silent in the corner, was listening. Only Ben remained frozen, staring at his plate. When Rosie finally wound down, Margaret smiled. "Thank you for sharing that with me. Will you play horses with me tomorrow? If there's time after lessons. Promise?" "Promise." Ben stood abruptly, chair scraping. "Caleb Barn." Then he was gone. Annie leaned close to Margaret. "He doesn't like talking about it before," I noticed. "He thinks if we forget, it'll hurt less." Margaret met the girl's eyes. "Does it?" "No," Annie whispered. "It just makes us lonely." Later, after the children were in bed, Margaret sat on the porch in the cooling night air. Stars spread overhead in impossible numbers, bright and close and indifferent. Somewhere in the darkness an owl called. The door opened. Ben stepped out, bottle in hand. He froze when he saw her. "Miss Chen, Mr. Harrison." An awkward pause. He moved to the far end of the porch, putting distance between them, and leaned against the railing. "I'm not a bad father," he said finally. Voice rough. "I never said you were." "You think it, though." Margaret considered her words. "I think you're a grieving husband who's trying to survive. I think your children are doing the same. And I think you're all doing it alone when you could do it together." He took a drink. "You don't know anything about it. You're right. I don't know what it's like to lose a spouse. But I know what it's like to have people look at you and see something broken." He glanced at her. "You don't look broken. Neither do you. But we both are, aren't we? Just in different ways." Ben turned the bottle in his hands. "Her name was Catherine." "She was?" "She made everything better just by being in it. When she laughed, the kids laughed. When she sang, the house felt like a home. His voice cracked. I don't know how to do that. I only know how to work, so teach them that. Work beside them. Let them know you. They know me. They know the man you've become. The one who's too tired and too sad to see them anymore. Margaret stood. Your children are remarkable, Mr. Harrison, but they need a father, not just a foreman. She went inside before he could respond. That night, she lay awake, listening to the house settle. She thought about Ben's hands, scarred and strong. Thought about the way he'd said his wife's name, Catherine, like a prayer. She thought about the secret in her own body, the inability that had made her worthless in Philadelphia's eyes. And she thought about 6 children who needed teaching. Not mothering, maybe that was enough. Maybe here, in this broken place full of broken people, she could finally build something that mattered. The next morning, Margaret woke to find a book on her doorstep. Old leather-bound, the title worn away. Inside, pressed flowers marked certain pages, passages about teaching, about patience, about seeing students as individuals. On the flyleaf, in careful script, Catherine's, she would have wanted you to have it. B.H. Margaret held the book to her chest and felt something shift, not hope exactly, but possibility, the smallest crack in the wall he'd built. She dressed quickly and went to ring the school bell, its clear note carrying across the morning air, calling the children to learning, calling them all, perhaps, toward something none of them had expected to find. The book became Margaret's compass. Catherine's notes filled the margins, observations about each child, strategies that had worked, small victories celebrated in careful script. Sam responds well to hands-on learning. Let him build with blocks while practicing letters. Annie needs encouragement, not correction. She doubts herself too easily. Caleb is brilliant but afraid to care about anything that isn't practical. Margaret implemented the notes, adapting them to her own methods. Within 2 weeks, the schoolhouse transformed. Sam worked with clay letters he could touch and manipulate. Annie read aloud to the younger children, gaining confidence with each story. The twins competed in mathematics races that Margaret timed with an old pocket watch. Even Caleb, skeptical and resistant, began staying after lessons to debate philosophy hidden inside agricultural journals. But the real shift happened outside the classroom. It started with the well Margaret had been carrying water from the pump to the schoolhouse every morning, 2 buckets that left her shoulders aching. On the 3rd week, she arrived to find a water barrel installed outside the schoolhouse door, already filled. Ben was walking away, tools in hand. Mr. Harrison, she called. He paused but didn't turn. Seemed inefficient. The barrel catches rainwater. Should last you. Thank you. He nodded once and kept walking. 2 days later, Margaret noticed the schoolhouse stove drew better. Someone had cleaned the chimney. Fresh firewood appeared in a neat stack by the door each morning before she arrived. The broken window latch was repaired. A new bookshelf materialized, sanded smooth and sturdy. Ben never mentioned any of it. Never lingered to accept thanks. Just fixed things quietly and moved on. Margaret began responding in kind. She mended the kitchen curtains that had hung torn for months, organized the chaotic pantry, taught Annie 3 new recipes that stretched their provisions further, started a small herb garden behind the house, rosemary, thyme, sage, plants that required little water but offered much. They orbited each other carefully. 2 planets held in balance by gravity and caution. One afternoon, Margaret found Rosie crying behind the barn, her wooden horse missing a leg. Thunder broke. The little girl sobbed.
She can't run any more. Margaret examined the toy.
Clean break fixable. May I borrow her? I'll have her back before supper. She found Ben in the workshop measuring planks. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Miss Chen, something wrong. She held up the horse. Rosie's heart broken. I thought perhaps you could... He set down his tools and took the toy, turning it in his calloused hands. Something in his expression softened. Catherine made this. I just shaped the wood. She painted the details, the eyes, the marking on the flank. It's beautiful work. She was good at making broken things whole again. He reached for a thin dowel and wood glue. I can fix it, but the repair will show. Rosie won't mind. She just wants Thunder to run again. Ben worked in silence, precise and focused. Margaret watched his hands. The same hands that mended fences and delivered calves and probably held his wife as she died. Hands that knew how to fix everything except grief. "You're good with the children," he said without looking up. "Better than the last teacher. Better than I expected. They make it easy. They're hungry for attention. They're hungry for a lot of things I can't give them." He tested the joint, satisfied. "I'm not blind, Miss Chen. I know I've failed them in ways that matter. I just don't know how to be what they need." Margaret chose her words carefully. "They don't need perfection. They need presence. I'm here every day. Being present is different than being here." He finally looked at her. "Is that what you tell yourself? That showing up is enough?" The words landed like a slap. Margaret stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You ran away from Philadelphia. Came out here to escape something. That's not presence. That's hiding." Heat flooded her face. "You don't know anything about my reasons. I know running when I see it. I've been doing it for 3 years. He set the horse down gently. "Difference is, I admit it." They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both exposed. Finally, Margaret took the horse. "Thank you for fixing this, Miss Chen," but she was already walking away, anger and shame burning equally in her chest. That night at supper, Ben didn't appear. Annie served the meal, worry creasing her forehead. "Pa said he wasn't hungry." "That's not like him." After the children went to bed, Margaret made a plate and carried it to the workshop. Light glowed through the cracks. Inside, Ben sat at his workbench, head in his hands. She set the plate down. "You should eat." He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "Came to gloat?" "No." She pulled up a stool. "Came to apologize. You were right. I did run." He straightened slowly. "I shouldn't have said that." "Why not?" "It was true." Margaret folded her hands in her lap. "I was engaged. He was suitable, proper family, good prospects, everything my mother wanted. When I told him I couldn't bear children, he ended it. Said he needed a real wife, not a defective one." Ben's jaw tightened. He was a fool. He was honest. And so were all the others, who looked at me like I was broken. She met his eyes. "So yes, I ran. I came here because I thought maybe, in a place where no one knew, I could be more than my inability. I could be useful in other ways. You are useful. The children need a teacher, not a mother, I know. That's why this works." She gestured around the workshop. "Out here my worth isn't tied to my womb. I can contribute without being constantly reminded of what I lack." Ben stood and moved to the window, staring out into darkness. "Catherine and I lost 2 babies before Rosie. Boys, both of them. Born too early, lived less than a day." His voice was barely above a whisper. "She blamed herself. I told her it wasn't her fault, that we already had 5 beautiful children, that we were blessed. She said she felt like she'd failed me." "What did you tell her?" "That she could never fail me. That she was everything." He pressed his palm against the glass. 3 months later she caught a fever, was gone in a week. And I realized I'd been a liar. She wasn't everything. She was more than that. She was the part of me that knew how to feel things." Margaret stood and crossed to him. "You still feel things. You're just afraid of them, aren't you?" She considered lying, then decided against it. "Terrified." Every single day, they stood side by side, 2 damaged people learning to recognize their own reflection in someone else. "I shouldn't have called you a coward," Ben said finally. "Takes courage to start over. I shouldn't have judged your parenting. I have no right. You have every right. You're the only one brave enough to tell me the truth." Margaret felt something loosen in her chest. Not attraction exactly, but connection, recognition. "We're a pair, aren't we? Both running from things we can't outpace." "Maybe." He turned to face her. "Or maybe we're both finally standing still long enough to figure out what comes next." The air between them felt charged, fragile. Margaret stepped back, needing distance. "Your supper's getting cold. Stay," he said. Not a command, a question. She stayed. They ate together in the workshop, talking about small things. He told her about the ranch, the cattle bloodlines he was trying to improve, the pasture rotation system that was finally showing results. She told him about Philadelphia, her sisters, the books she'd loved as a child. They didn't mention grief or loss or fear. Just let conversation unspool naturally, easily. When she finally returned to the house, it was past midnight. She fell asleep with the taste of possibility on her tongue. The next morning, Ben joined them for breakfast. Actually sat down, ate slowly, listened to Rosie's elaborate story about Thunder's miraculous healing. He even smiled, small and rusty but real. Caleb noticed first, exchanging a glance with Annie. The younger children simply accepted it, as children do, adapting instantly to the new normal. After breakfast, Ben followed Margaret to the schoolhouse. "Mind if I observe?" She hid her surprise. "Of course not." He sat in the back, hat in his lap, watching as she taught. Watching as Sam shaped clay letters with fierce concentration, as Annie read with growing confidence, as the twins raced through multiplication tables, as Caleb debated the ethics of manifest destiny with unexpected passion. At the end of lessons, Ben approached Sam's desk. "Show me what you learned." Sam went rigid, expecting criticism. I can spell my name now, in 3 different ways." "Show me." With shaking hands, Sam demonstrated clay letters first, then writing in sand, finally tracing in the air. Each method bypassed the traditional paper and pencil approach that made letters swim. Ben watched quietly, then put a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's good work." "Real good work?" Sam's face transformed. "Really? Really?" Ben looked at Margaret. "I was wrong. About teaching methods. About a lot of things." After the children scattered, Ben lingered. "I want to help. With the school, with the children. However I can. You're busy with the ranch. I'll make time." He picked up one of Catherine's old books from the shelf, running his thumb over her name inscribed inside the cover. "She'd want me to. And I want to." So he did. Ben began joining afternoon lessons twice a week, teaching practical mathematics through ranch problems. How to calculate feed ratios. How to estimate board feet in lumber. How to read land surveys and water rights documents. The children responded to his presence, sitting straighter, trying harder, but the real change came in small moments. Margaret found him reading to Rosie one evening. The little girl curled in his lap as he navigated a picture book with careful patience. She heard him laughing with the twins as they built a model irrigation system. Watched him sit with Caleb in the barn, talking about university, about options beyond the ranch. He was learning to be present. Not just here. One Saturday, Ben announced they were taking the day off for a picnic. The children responded with chaos, questions, demands, excitement that filled every corner of the house. They rode out in the wagon, heading toward a meadow near the creek. Margaret sat beside Ben on the bench seat, their shoulders bumping with each rut in the road. Behind them, the children sang songs that dissolved into laughter and arguments in equal measure. The meadow bloomed with wildflowers, purple lupine, yellow arrowleaf balsam root, white yarrow. They spread blankets and unpacked the baskets Annie had prepared. The children scattered immediately, the twins racing toward the creek, Sam climbing a cottonwood, Rosie gathering flowers with serious concentration. Ben watched them with something like wonder. "I'd forgotten they could be this way, just light." "They needed permission," Margaret said. "From me?" "From themselves. Children mirror what they see. They were grieving because you were. Now you're healing, so they can too." He looked at her. "You did that. We did that together." Caleb approached, hands in his pockets. "Pa, can I talk to you?" Ben stood. "Course, son." They walked away together, heads bent in conversation. Margaret watched them go, feeling pride swell in her chest. Annie sat down beside her. "He's different now. He's remembering who he was." "No," Annie said thoughtfully. "He's becoming someone new, someone who has Ma's gentleness but his own strength." She glanced at Margaret. "You make him better, Annie. It's okay." "I'm glad." The girl smiled. Ma would be glad too. She wouldn't want him to be alone forever. Margaret's throat tightened. "I'm just the teacher. You're more than that. Everyone knows it except maybe you two." Before Margaret could respond, Grace shrieked from the creek. They rushed over to find her soaking wet, Luke laughing hysterically. And Sam, caught between defending his sister and appreciating the comedy, Ben returned, assessed the situation, then deliberately stepped into the creek, fully clothed. The children froze in shock. Then he splashed Luke with a massive wave. What followed was chaos, beautiful, loud, soaking chaos. All of them ended up in the water, except Annie, who protected the food supplies with fierce determination, and Margaret, who watched from the bank, laughing until her sides hurt. Finally, dripping and exhausted, they collapsed on the blankets. The children fell asleep in patches of sunlight, warm and peaceful. Ben sat beside Margaret, both of them watching the clouds drift past. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on us." "On me?" Margaret turned to look at him, this man who was learning to live again, who was letting himself feel joy without guilt. "You're easy to believe in, Ben Harrison." He met her eyes, and something passed between them. Not words, not promises. Just recognition of the undeniable shift in the gravity between them, a shift that would change everything. August brought heat that shimmered across the pastures like liquid glass. The cattle sought shade beneath scattered cottonwoods, and the children's lessons moved earlier to capture the cool morning hours. Margaret had settled into the rhythm of ranch life, the early risings, the constant work. The way each day demanded everything you had and then asked for more. She was hanging laundry one afternoon when a rider appeared on the eastern trail. Not the casual approach of a neighbor, but something more deliberate. The horse was sleek and well-fed, the rider's clothes too fine for honest ranch work. Ben emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. Margaret watched him tense, shoulders squaring in a way that spoke of trouble recognized. The rider dismounted with practiced ease. He was perhaps 40, with silver threading his temples and eyes that calculated everything they touched. "Benjamin Harrison, it's been a while, Marcus." Ben's voice held no warmth. "Didn't expect to see you out this way." "Business brings me." Marcus removed his gloves slowly, making a show of it. "Mind if we talk?" "Somewhere private." Ben glanced toward the house where Caleb had appeared in the doorway, instincts alert. "Office is fine." They disappeared inside. Margaret continued hanging clothes, but her hands moved automatically while her mind churned. Something about the visitor felt wrong, predatory in a way that had nothing to do with immediate violence and everything to do with patient destruction. 20 minutes later, Marcus emerged alone, a thin smile on his face. He tipped his hat to Margaret as he passed. "Ma'am, lovely property you have here. Be a shame if anything happened to it." He rode away before she could respond. Ben didn't come out of the office. After finishing the laundry, Margaret went to find him. He stood at the window, a letter crumpled in his fist, staring at nothing. "Ben." He didn't turn. "Marcus Whitfield. We grew up together, went to school together. I thought he was a friend." His laugh was bitter. "Turns out he was just patient. What does he want?" Ben tossed the letter on the desk. It was a notice from the Territorial Land Office, official stamped threatening in its bureaucratic language. "He's claiming Catherine's family never held legal title to the southern section. Says there was a surveying error in 1870, that the boundary markers were placed wrong, and that 2,000 acres of my ranch actually belong to the territorial holdings he's been acquiring." Margaret scanned the document. "Can he do that?" "If he can prove it in court, yes. And Marcus has money, connections, lawyers who specialize in finding loopholes in old land grants." Ben's hands clenched. "That southern section has our best water access. Without it, the ranch becomes marginal at best. We'd have to reduce the herd by half, maybe more. It would break us. There must be something you can do." Original surveys, deeds, burned in the courthouse fire 6 years ago. Everything before 1885 is gone. He finally looked at her, and the defeat in his eyes was worse than anger. Catherine's father fought for this land, built it from nothing. She loved every acre of it. And now some Eastern-educated vulture is going to take it because he knows I can't afford the legal fight. Margaret's mind raced. "How long do you have?" 60 days to respond to the claim. After that, it goes to the territorial court." He sank into the chair. "I've got maybe $300 saved." A lawyer in Cheyenne would cost 10 times that, and even then, there's no guarantee without the original documents. What about witnesses? People who knew the boundaries? Most are dead. The ones who aren't, he shook his head. Marcus has been buying up smaller ranches, consolidating. Anyone who might testify against him either works for him now or needs him too much to risk making an enemy. Margaret pulled up a chair, her teacher's mind already organizing the problem into manageable pieces. Tell me everything. When Catherine's family settled, who was here? What landmarks defined the boundaries? Are there any secondary records, tax documents, water rights filings, anything? Ben looked at her with something between hope and desperation. Why are you doing this? Because that's what people do. They help each other. You don't owe us anything. This isn't about debt. She met his eyes squarely. This is about what's right. They worked late into the night, piecing together what they could. Catherine's father had filed water rights in 1872. Those records might still exist in the territorial capital. There had been a boundary dispute with a neighbor in 1878, resolved by a traveling judge whose circuit records might contain notes. And old Dutch Peterson, who ran a small spread 20 miles north, had been ranching in the area since before statehood talks began. Dutch doesn't like Marcus, Ben said, but he's nearly 70 and his memory isn't what it was. It's still a place to start. Over the next week, Margaret took on the investigation with the same methodical approach she brought to teaching. She wrote letters to the territorial offices in Helena. She organized what documents Ben had into chronological order, building a timeline. She rode out with Caleb to interview Dutch Peterson, who remembered Catherine's father and confirmed the southern boundary markers had always been where they stood now. Marcus's grandfather tried to claim that land back in '69, Dutch recalled, sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee. Got laughed out of the land office. Family's been nursing that grudge ever since. Would you testify to that? Margaret asked. Dutch's weathered face creased with worry. Testifying means going to court, means making an enemy of a man who could ruin me. It also means doing what's right. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not from around here, are you? Philadelphia. Figured. You got that Eastern certainty, like the world's supposed to bend to fairness. He sipped his coffee. Out here we learn different, but... He sighed. Catherine was a good woman. Ben's a good man, and I'm too damn old to spend my last years being a coward. I'll testify. Small victories accumulated. Margaret found water rights documents in Helena that corroborated the boundary lines. She located the traveling judge's grandson, now a clerk in Butte, who sent copies of his grandfather's case notes. She even discovered that Marcus had filed similar claims against 3 other ranches in the past 5 years, a pattern that suggested predatory intent rather than legitimate grievance. But for every piece of evidence they gathered, Marcus countered with his own. He produced a survey map from 1869, conveniently discovered in a private collection, that showed different boundaries. He brought in his own surveyors, who testified the current markers had been moved. He filed motion after motion, each one costing Ben money he didn't have just to respond. The strain showed everywhere. Ben worked longer hours, pushing himself and the ranch hands harder. He became short-tempered with the children, then guilty about it, then more withdrawn. The easy warmth that had developed between him and Margaret cooled under the pressure of survival. One evening, Margaret found Annie crying in the kitchen. Pa yelled at Sam today, the girl said. For nothing, really. Sam was just being 7. And Pa just broke, said things he didn't mean. Where's Sam now? Barn, won't come in. Margaret found the boy curled in an empty stall, face buried in his knees. She sat beside him in the hay. I hate him, Sam whispered. I hate that he's mean now. He's not mean. He's scared. Grown-ups aren't supposed to be scared. Everyone gets scared, Sam. Your father is facing something that could take away everything your mother's family built. That's terrifying. It doesn't excuse how he spoke to you, but it explains it. Sam looked up, eyes red. Are we going to lose the ranch? Margaret wanted to lie, to promise everything would be fine. But she'd learned that children deserved truth. I don't know. We're fighting hard to prevent it. But some things are bigger than effort, Miss Chen. His voice was very small. If we lose the ranch, will you still stay? The question pierced her. I don't know that either. He leaned against her shoulder, and she wrapped an arm around him. Both of them sitting in the dim barn, while outside the sun set on another day of uncertainty. Ben found them there an hour later. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene, and something in his face crumbled. "Sam," he said roughly, "I owe you an apology." Sam didn't move. Ben entered the stall, lowering himself to sit on Sam's other side. "I was wrong. What I said, how I said it, none of that was about you. You didn't deserve it. You said I was underfoot, that I was in the way. I know. And I was lying." Ben's voice caught. "You're never in the way. None of you are. I'm just—" He struggled for words. "I'm scared, son. Scared of failing you all. And when I get scared, I get mean. That's my fault, not yours." Sam was quiet for a long moment. "Then are you going to lose the ranch?" "Maybe. I'm trying not to. Miss Chen is helping. She is. More than I deserve." Sam finally looked at his father. "I don't hate you. I know." Ben pulled the boy close. "But you'd have the right to." Margaret stood, giving them space. But Ben's hand shot out, catching her wrist. "Don't go." So she stayed, the three of them sitting together in the gathering dark. A small island of connection in a sea of trouble. The following week brought Marcus back to the ranch, this time with a different approach. He arrived at dinner time, all charm and false friendliness. "Ben, I've been thinking," he said, accepting coffee from a wary Annie. "This legal battle is expensive for both of us. What if we could find a compromise? I'm listening. Drop the dispute. Acknowledge my claim to the southern section. In exchange, I'll pay you fair market value, say $5,000, and grant you water access through an easement." Ben's jaw tightened. "That land is worth 3 times that, and you know it. Perhaps. But liquid capital versus potential loss. Think about it. 5,000 would clear any debts, give you cushion against bad years. You keep the ranch, your family stays secure, and we both avoid court. And you get premium grazing land at a fraction of its value." Marcus smiled. "I prefer to think of it as both of us getting what we need. What I need is for you to take your fraudulent claim and ride off my property." The smile vanished. "Think carefully, Ben. I'm offering you a way out. Turn it down, and I promise you'll regret it. I have resources you can't imagine. I can drag this through courts for years, bleed you dry with legal fees, ruin your credit so you can't borrow operating capital. By the time I'm done, you won't have a ranch left to fight for." Margaret spoke from the doorway, her voice ice-cold. "Is that a threat, Mr. Whitfield?" Marcus turned, taking in her defensive posture. "Miss Chen, isn't it?" "The school teacher from Philadelphia?" His tone dripped condescension. "This is business. Perhaps you should leave it to those who understand such things. I understand extortion quite well, thank you. And I understand men who mistake ruthlessness for strength. Careful, Miss Chen. You're a guest here, employed at Ben's discretion. If the Harrison family falls on hard times, where does that leave you? Standing exactly where I am now? On the right side?" Marcus's expression hardened. "You're both fools. I came here offering mercy. Now you'll get justice instead. My justice." He set down the coffee cup. 60 days, Ben, then you lose everything." After he left, the house felt poisoned. The children had heard everything, their faces tight with fear. Caleb looked ready to fight. Annie clutched Rosie, who'd started crying quietly. Ben stood frozen, hands clenched, jaw working. Finally, he looked at Margaret. "You shouldn't have done that." "Done what?" "Made an enemy of him. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when he walked onto this property, acting like he owned it." Her eyes flashed. "And don't you dare tell me to stay in my place. I've had quite enough men who think I should know my role. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need partnership. We're in this together, or did all those weeks of building trust mean nothing?" They stared at each other, both breathing hard, years of separate wounds suddenly raw and exposed. Caleb stepped between them. "Stop it, both of you." His young face was set with determination beyond his years. "Marcus wants us divided, wants us to be scared and fighting each other. We can't give him that." The truth of it settled over them like cold water. Ben's shoulders sagged. "You're right. I'm sorry, Margaret nodded stiffly. So am I, but the damage lingered. That night, lying awake in her narrow bed, Margaret felt the old familiar fear creeping back. She'd let herself believe she belonged here, that she could build something lasting. But Marcus's words echoed, "If the Harrison family falls on hard times, where does that leave you? Nowhere." Just as she'd always been nowhere. The next morning, she rose before dawn and began drafting a letter to her sister in Philadelphia. "If I need to return," she started, then crumpled the paper. She wouldn't run. Not again. Not from this. She found Ben in the barn, grooming horses with mechanical efficiency. "I meant what I said yesterday," she told him. "This is my fight too." He didn't look at her. "You should write to the teaching agency. Find another placement. Somewhere stable. Is that what you want?" Finally, he turned. "What I want doesn't matter. I'm about to lose everything, Margaret. I can't ask you to go down with this ship." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." "Why? Why would you choose this mess?" "Because I love you," she thought but didn't say. "Because these children are mine in every way that matters except blood. Because this is the first place I've ever felt whole." What she said was, "Because some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible." Ben crossed the space between them, stopping close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face. "I can't lose you too." "I can't. Then don't give up. Fight with me." He searched her face, looking for doubt and finding only determination. Slowly, he nodded. They spent the next week preparing for court, gathering every scrap of evidence, rehearsing testimony, building the strongest case they could with their meager resources. Dutch Peterson agreed to testify. 2 other old-timers came forward with similar stories about Marcus's grandfather. The clerk from Butte sent more documents. It wasn't enough. They all knew it wasn't enough. But they would fight anyway. The night before Ben had to leave for the territorial capital, the whole family gathered for supper. No one spoke much. The weight of tomorrow pressed down on all of them. After the children went to bed, Ben and Margaret sat on the porch. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles. "If I lose," Ben said quietly, "if Marcus takes the land, I want you to know something." "Ben, let me finish." He turned to face her. "These last months, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Not just help with the children or the ranch. You gave me back the ability to hope, to feel like maybe I deserved another chance at happiness." Margaret's throat tightened. "You've given me the same thing. If I lose the ranch. I'll have to find work somewhere else, start over with nothing. I can't ask you to be part of that. But I want you to know," he took her hand, "I want you to know that you matter. To me, to the children. Whatever happens, that's true." She squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. They sat together until the cold drove them inside, holding on to each other and the fragile hope that somehow, against impossible odds, they might still win. But morning came anyway, bringing with it the hard reality of a fight neither of them knew how to win. Ben left at dawn, with Caleb beside him. The boy had insisted on coming, and after a moment's hesitation, Ben had agreed. Margaret watched them ride toward the territorial capital, 2 figures growing smaller against the vast Montana sky until they disappeared entirely. The house felt hollow without them. Annie moved through her chores with mechanical efficiency, her usual chatter replaced by tense silence. The younger children sensed the weight of the moment and played quietly, their games subdued. Margaret threw herself into lessons, but even she struggled to maintain focus. 3 days passed with no word. On the 4th morning, a telegram arrived. Margaret's hands shook as she opened it. "Hearing postponed. Marcus filed new evidence. Need more time." Annie read over her shoulder. "What does that mean?" "It means Marcus is playing games. Delaying, forcing your father to stay away from the ranch longer, costing more money in room and board." Margaret crumpled the telegram. "It's a strategy. Bleed the opponent dry before the real fight even begins. That's not fair. No, it's not." That afternoon, a different rider appeared. Not Marcus this time, but a younger man in a clerk's suit. He dismounted and approached the house with careful steps, like someone entering a wolf's den. "Mrs. Harrison," he called. Margaret stepped onto the porch. "Miss Chen, I'm the teacher here." "Ah." He removed his hat nervously. I'm looking for Benjamin Harrison. I have documents requiring his signature. Mr. Harrison is in Helena. Court business? The clerk's face fell. I see. The thing is, these documents are time-sensitive. They concern the mortgage on this property. Margaret's stomach dropped. What mortgage? The one held by Territorial Bank and Trust. Mr. Harrison is 3 months behind on payments. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings. He held out an envelope. He has 30 days to bring the account current or vacate the premises. Margaret took the envelope with numb fingers. There must be some mistake. I'm sorry, ma'am. I just deliver the papers. He remounted quickly and rode away before she could ask more questions. Inside, Margaret tore open the envelope. The documents were official, stamped merciless in their bureaucratic language. Ben owed $1,800 in back payments plus penalties. Total amount due, $2,100. Annie appeared in the doorway. What is it? Margaret tried to shield the papers, but Annie was too quick, too sharp. The girl read over her shoulder, and her face went white. The bank is taking the house. Not if we can help it. Margaret's mind raced. Your father must have taken out a mortgage to pay for legal fees. He didn't want to worry you with it. $2,000. Annie's voice was hollow. We don't have that. We don't have anything close to that. The younger children gathered, sensing a crisis. Rosie clutched her wooden horse. Sam pressed close to Annie. The twins stood side by side, united by fear. Margaret looked at their faces. These children she'd come to love, staring at her with desperate hope that she could fix the unfixable. She thought of Ben, fighting one battle in Helena while another opened behind him. She thought of Marcus Whitfield, orchestrating everything with cold precision, and she thought of the one thing she had left from Philadelphia. The one thing she'd kept despite leaving everything else behind. Annie, watch your siblings. I need to ride into town. Miss Chen, trust me. She rode hard to the settlement, her mind churning through calculations. At the general store, Hoskins looked up from his ledger. Miss Chen, trouble. Do you know Samuel Brennan? The assayer? Sure. Office is next to the telegraph station. Why? She didn't answer, just headed toward the small building with Brennan Assay and Trade painted on the window. Inside, a middle-aged man with spectacles looked up from examining a piece of ore. Help you, miss. Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a velvet pouch. From it she extracted a ring, gold band, modest diamond, elegant in its simplicity. Her grandmother's ring, passed down through 3 generations, given to her on her 16th birthday. I need to know what this is worth. Brennan took the ring, examining it through his loupe. He tested the gold, measured the stone, made notes. Finally he looked up. It's good quality. The diamond is small but well cut. The gold is 18 carat. I could give you $300. It's worth more than that. In a city, maybe. Out here, jewelry doesn't hold the same value. He saw her expression and softened. I can go to $350, but that's my limit. I still have to make a profit when I sell it. Margaret's throat tightened. The ring represented her only physical connection to family, to history, to the girl she'd been before loss, taught her the price of loving anything. But that girl was gone anyway, replaced by someone who understood that the only things worth keeping were the ones you were willing to lose. 400, she said. And I need cash today. Brennan hesitated, then nodded. Deal. She left with $400 in her satchel and a lightness where the ring had been. It wasn't enough to save the ranch, but it was a start. Back at the property, she found Caleb and Ben had returned, both looking exhausted and defeated. The judge postponed again, Ben said without preamble. Marcus's lawyers filed a motion questioning the validity of the water rights records. We have to wait another week for a ruling on whether the evidence is even admissible. Ben, I can't afford another week in Helena, Margaret. I'm bleeding money I don't have. He sank into a chair. I think I need to accept Marcus's offer. Take the 5,000, save what I can. No. He looked up, startled by the steel in her voice. Margaret handed him the foreclosure notice. This came today. Ben read it, his face draining of color. Oh, God. Marcus orchestrated this. He probably bought the mortgage from the bank specifically to put pressure on you. How did you... Ben's eyes widened. The timing. The amount. This wasn't a coincidence. Nothing about this has been a coincidence. Margaret pulled out the cash. I have $400. It's not enough, but it's something. Ben stared at the money. Where did you get this? I sold my grandmother's ring. Margaret, no, it's done. And before you start with the masculine pride routine, understand that I didn't do it for you. I did it for Annie and Caleb and those 4 children who are upstairs right now wondering if they're going to lose the only home they remember. Ben stood, running his hands through his hair. 400 isn't enough. We need 2,000. And even if we had it, Marcus would just find another way to attack. Then we attack back. How? We have nothing. No leverage, no resources, no, we have the truth. Margaret's eyes blazed. And we have each other. When did you become such a coward, Ben Harrison? The words hit like a slap. Ben's jaw clenched. I'm trying to protect my family. By surrendering. By teaching your children that when things get hard, you just give up. That's not fair. None of this is fair. But fair and right aren't the same thing, and you know it. Margaret stepped closer. Catherine's father didn't give up when he built this ranch from nothing. Catherine didn't give up when she lost 2 babies and kept loving anyway. And I didn't give up when the man I was supposed to marry told me I was defective and worthless. Silence fell between them, sharp and painful. Finally, Ben spoke, his voice rough. What do you want me to do? Fight, not just in court, really fight. Find Marcus's weakness and use it. He doesn't have weaknesses. He's too powerful. Everyone has weaknesses. We just have to look harder. Margaret pulled out the documents she'd gathered. He's filed similar claims against 3 other ranches. All of them settled rather than fight. Why? Because they couldn't afford to fight, or because Marcus had something on them. Leverage beyond just legal maneuvering. She spread the papers across the table. The Miller Ranch settled in 3 days. The Rodriguez spread in less than a week. That's too fast for just financial pressure. Caleb had been listening from the doorway. Now he stepped forward. I heard something once. At the general store. 2 men talking about how Marcus got the Miller place. Said something about fire insurance that wasn't quite legal. Ben's head snapped up. What? Miller had claimed fire damage from a lightning strike, got insurance money. But the men said Marcus proved the lightning strike was actually arson, Miller's own hand, to collect the payout. Marcus agreed not to report it if Miller signed over the disputed land. Margaret and Ben exchanged glances. Blackmail, Margaret said quietly. If he did it once, Ben's eyes sharpened. He might have done it with others. They worked through the night, piecing together a pattern. The Rodriguez spread had been accused of stealing cattle. Charges that disappeared after Marcus acquired their land. The Peterson boundary dispute had involved questions about water rights that were suddenly resolved when Old Dutch's neighbor sold out to Marcus. Each case showed the same fingerprints. Pressure, accusation and convenient resolution once Marcus got what he wanted. He's not just a land grabber, Margaret said. He's a blackmailer. A systematic one, but we can't prove any of it, Ben countered. It's all hearsay and supposition. Then we make him prove it. Margaret's mind was working at full speed now, seeing connections, building strategy. We don't go after his land claims. We go after his character. We make him defend himself. How? She looked at Ben, then at Caleb, then at the documents scattered across the table. We call witnesses, everyone he's ever pressured or threatened. We subpoena his business records. We make the trial about him, not about boundary markers and survey lines. Ben shook his head. That would take resources we don't have. Lawyers who know how to... A knock at the door interrupted him. Margaret opened it to find Dutch Peterson standing on the porch, hat in his weathered hands. Behind him stood 3 other ranchers, older men with sun-scarred faces and determined eyes. Heard you were having trouble with Marcus, Dutch said. Figured it was time we stopped letting that snake operate in the shadows. One of the other men stepped forward. Name's Robert Chen. I lost my south pasture to Marcus 2 years ago. He found out I'd been behind on my taxes, threatened to report me to the territorial authorities unless I signed over the land. I've been ashamed ever since. Margaret's breath caught. Chen, are you? From China originally, yes. Came during the gold rush, stayed for ranching. He studied her face. "You've got the look of my people, even if the name came through marriage. My husband was Chinese," Margaret said softly. "He died before we could build a life together." The revelation hung in the air, a piece of her past she'd never shared, a loss that explained so much about her flight from Philadelphia and her fierce independence. Ben looked at her with new understanding. But there was no time for questions. Dutch cleared his throat. "Point is, we're all tired of Marcus. We'll testify, all of us. We'll tell you what he did, how he operates. Together, maybe we can finally stop him." Ben stood, hope kindling in his eyes for the first time in weeks. "It could work. If we present a pattern of behavior, show he's been systematically defrauding landowners." "The judge would have to investigate," Margaret finished. "Even if we lose the boundary dispute, we damage Marcus enough that he has to back off," the ranchers nodded. One of them, a man named Cooper, added, "We took up a collection too. Wasn't much we could spare, but we got about $800 between us. Figure you need it more than we do right now?" Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. Ben's voice was thick when he spoke. "I can't accept that. You can and you will," Dutch said firmly. "This stopped being just about you the moment Marcus started his pattern. You're fighting for all of us now. Let us help." Ben looked at Margaret, then at the ranchers, then at his son standing tall beside him. Finally he nodded. "All right. We fight together." They spent the next 3 days preparing. Margaret organized testimony, coached witnesses, built a timeline of Marcus's predatory behavior. The ranchers provided documentation. Letters, contracts, records of threats, both veiled and explicit. Even Hoskins, from the general store, contributed, revealing that Marcus had pressured him to refuse credit to anyone who opposed him. The picture that emerged was damning. A man who'd built his empire not through honest business, but through systematic exploitation of his neighbors' vulnerabilities. When they rode back to Helena, it was a delegation, 8 ranchers, their families, and Margaret, who'd insisted on coming despite Ben's concerns. "I'm seeing this through," she'd said. "Besides, you'll need someone to organize all this evidence. That's what teachers do." The courtroom was packed. Marcus sat with 3 lawyers, confident and relaxed. But when he saw the crowd that had gathered against him, something flickered in his expression. The judge, a stern woman named Adelaide Morrison, who'd been appointed by the territorial governor, surveyed the assembly with sharp eyes. "This hearing is about a boundary dispute," she said. "Why are there so many people here?" Ben's borrowed lawyer, a young man named Thomas Webb, who'd agreed to take the case for a fraction of his usual fee after hearing the story, stood. "Your Honor, we believe the boundary dispute is merely one symptom of a larger pattern of fraudulent land acquisition. We have witnesses prepared to testify to Mr. Whitfield's systematic abuse of legal processes to defraud honest ranchers of their property." Marcus's lead lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! This is character assassination, not legal argument." "Then you won't mind if we examine that character," Webb replied smoothly. Judge Morrison considered. "I'll allow preliminary testimony. If it proves relevant to the case at hand, we'll proceed. If not, I'll clear the room and we'll stick to the boundary question." "Understood." Both sides agreed. What followed was 4 hours of testimony that painted a portrait of calculated exploitation. Dutch Peterson described the pressure tactics. Robert Chen detailed the tax threat. Miller, brought in under subpoena, admitted the fire insurance fraud and Marcus's blackmail. One after another, the witnesses spoke truth that had been buried under fear. Marcus's lawyers objected repeatedly, but each time, Judge Morrison overruled them. The pattern was too clear, too systematic to dismiss. Finally, Margaret took the stand. She presented the timeline, the documentation, the evidence of coordinated attacks on vulnerable ranchers. She spoke with the clarity of a teacher, presenting an undeniable lesson, walking the judge through each calculated move in Marcus's game. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison looked at Marcus. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm suspending this hearing, pending a full investigation into your business practices by the territorial attorney. In the meantime, your claim on the Harrison land is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing you from filing any new land claims until the investigation is complete." Marcus stood, face flushed with rage. "This is outrageous. You can't." "I can and I have. This court is adjourned." Outside, the crowd erupted in celebration. Ben stood in the center of it, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, but his eyes searched until they found Margaret. He crossed to her and pulled her into an embrace, right there in front of everyone. "You did it. You saved us. We did it," she corrected. "All of us together." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "You never told me you were married." "It was brief. He died of influenza 6 months after our wedding. His family blamed me, said I'd brought bad luck. My family was ashamed I'd married outside our race. I was left with nothing but his surname and a lot of complicated grief." She met his eyes. "I didn't tell you because it doesn't define me anymore. Just like Catherine doesn't define you. We're more than our losses." "Yes," Ben said softly. "We are." And standing there in the afternoon sun, surrounded by people who'd chosen courage over fear, Margaret finally understood what home felt like. Not a place, a choice, and she'd chosen this. The ride back to the ranch took 2 days. They traveled as a group, Ben, Margaret, Caleb, and 3 of the ranchers who'd testified. The mood was lighter than it had been in months, punctuated by laughter and stories shared around the evening campfire. But underneath the celebration, something unspoken hung between Ben and Margaret, a question neither seemed ready to voice. When the ranch came into view on the second afternoon, the children poured out of the house like water from a broken dam. Annie reached them first, breathless and beaming. "Did you win?" "We won," Ben confirmed, dismounting to catch Rosie as she launched herself at him. The twins peppered Caleb with questions. Sam clung to Margaret's skirt, looking up at her with shining eyes. "You came back." "Of course I came back. I promised, didn't I?" That evening, they gathered for a proper celebration. Annie had prepared the best meal she could manage with their limited stores. The ranchers stayed for supper, filling the house with noise and warmth. Dutch Peterson told stories about the old days that made even Ben laugh. Robert Chen taught the children a card game from his homeland. For the first time since Catherine's death, the Harrison house felt alive. But as the guests departed and the children drifted toward bed, exhaustion caught up with everyone. Ben stood on the porch, watching the last riders disappear into the dusk. Margaret joined him, wrapping her shawl against the cooling air. "You should rest. You've barely slept in a week. Can't seem to settle." He glanced at her. "Keeps hitting me in waves. We actually won. The ranch is safe for now." Always the realist. "Someone has to be," but she smiled as she said it. "The territorial investigation will take months. Marcus has resources to drag it out, and there's still the mortgage to deal with." Ben nodded slowly. "The money from the ranchers, plus what you contributed, plus what I have saved, it's enough to bring the payments current. Barely. But it means we're operating without any reserve. One bad season, one illness in the herd. One crisis at a time," Margaret said firmly. "You won today. Let yourself feel that." He turned to face her fully. "I couldn't have done it without you. Not just the evidence and the organization, all of it. You gave me a reason to keep fighting when I was ready to surrender." "Ben," "Let me finish." He took a breath. "These months with you have been. I didn't think I could feel this way again. Didn't think I deserved to. Catherine was everything, and when she died, I thought that part of my life was over. Just focus on the children, keep the ranch running, exist until existing stops." Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. "What changed?" "You did. You came into our lives and refused to let us stay broken. You saw past my grief, past my failure as a father, and decided we were worth the effort." His voice roughened. "You made me want to be better, not for Catherine's memory, but for myself, for the children, for—" He trailed off, and the silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Margaret looked out at the darkening land. "I need to tell you something. About why I really left Philadelphia." "You don't have to." "I do. She gathered her courage. I told you about my fiancé ending things when I said I couldn't have children. What I didn't say was that before him there was Chen Wei, my husband. We married young, against both our families' wishes. He was brilliant, kind, everything I wanted. When he died, I was devastated, but there was also relief. Ben's brow furrowed. Relief? Because I'd known for months that something was wrong with me. We'd been trying for a child and nothing happened. I went to doctors who told me my womb was tilted wrong, or my constitution was too delicate, or any number of things that meant the same thing. I couldn't bear children. We said it didn't matter, that we'd adopt or simply love each other. But I saw the disappointment in his eyes. She wrapped her arms around herself. When he died, part of me thought maybe it was for the best. He could be with someone who could give him what I couldn't, and I could stop trying to be something I wasn't. Her voice cracked. Then I met Edward, my fiancé. I was honest from the start, told him about my inability. He said he understood that it didn't matter, but when it came time to actually commit, to stand before his family and society, suddenly it mattered very much. He told me he needed a real wife, someone whole. He was a fool, Ben said quietly. Maybe, but he wasn't entirely wrong. I am broken in that way, and coming here, being a teacher instead of a mother, it was supposed to be enough. I'd contribute, without having to fail at the one thing women are supposed to do naturally. She finally looked at him. But then I met your children, and you, and I started wanting things I'd convinced myself I couldn't have. Ben crossed to her, taking her hands in his. What things? A family, a home, a life that isn't defined by what I lack. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But I can't give you more children, Ben, and you deserve— Stop! His grip tightened. You think I need more children? I can barely manage the 6 I have. You think I need some perfect wife who can bear sons? I need a partner. Someone who sees me, challenges me, makes me want to be the man I used to be. But, Margaret, I don't care if you can have children. I care that you make Sam laugh while teaching him. I care that Annie talks to you about her mother without crying. I care that Caleb respects you enough to listen when you speak. I care that this house became a home again the moment you walked into it. He cupped her face in his calloused hands. I'm not asking you to be Catherine. I'm not asking you to be anything except exactly who you are. And who you are is the woman I've fallen in love with. Margaret's breath caught. You love me? Completely. Terrifyingly. I think I have since the night you told me I was failing my children and then showed me how to do better. He smiled crookedly. You're bossy and stubborn, and you don't know the first thing about ranching. But you're also brave and brilliant, and the best thing that's happened to this family in 3 years. She laughed through her tears. That's possibly the worst declaration of love I've ever heard. I'm out of practice. His thumb brushed her cheek. But I mean every word. I love you, Margaret Chen. And if you'll have me, have us. I'd like to spend whatever time we have left making you happy. Margaret looked up at him, at this complicated man who'd learned to live again, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. I love you too. I've been terrified to admit it, but I do. I love you and your impossible children, and this stubborn land, and everything that comes with it. Ben kissed her then, gentle at first, and then deeper, years of loneliness dissolving into warmth and promise. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. So what happens now? Margaret asked. Now. I need to do this properly. He stepped back, suddenly nervous. I don't have a ring. I don't have much of anything to offer except a struggling ranch and 6 children who will drive you to distraction. Ben, he dropped to one knee on the weathered porch boards. Margaret Chen, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in this impossible life? Will you let me love you for exactly who you are, broken places and all? Margaret looked down at him. This good man who'd learned to see past his own grief, who'd fought for his family, who'd chosen to love again despite the risk. and felt certain for the first time in years. Yes, on one condition. He raised an eyebrow. What's that? We tell the children together, as a family, because that's what we are now. Ben stood and kissed her again. Deal. They told the children the next morning at breakfast. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Rosie cheered and immediately began planning where her wooden horse would stand during the wedding. The twins high-fived each other. Sam hugged Margaret so hard she nearly lost her balance. Even Caleb, reserved and careful with emotion, allowed a genuine smile to cross his face. Only Annie was quiet, her expression unreadable. After the initial excitement died down and the younger children scattered to their chores, Annie approached Margaret. "Can we talk? Just us?" They walked to the small garden Margaret had planted, where herbs grew in neat rows. Annie knelt and began pulling weeds, her hands moving with deliberate focus. "You're worried," Margaret said gently. "I loved my mother." Annie's voice was tight. "I still love her, and I don't want to forget her or replace her or—" "Annie, look at me." Margaret knelt beside the girl. "I'm not trying to replace your mother. I couldn't even if I wanted to. Catherine built this family, loved you all, made this place a home. That's a legacy I can honor, but never replace." "Then what are you?" Margaret considered. "I'm the woman who loves your father, who loves all of you. I'm not your mother, Annie, but I could be your friend, your teacher, someone who stands beside you as you grow into the remarkable woman you're becoming." Annie's eyes filled with tears. "Will you wear her wedding ring?" The question caught Margaret off guard. I don't know. Would that hurt you?" "No." Annie wiped her eyes. "I think Mama would want it. Would want someone to love Pa the way she did. And you do. I can see it. The way you look at him, the way you fight for us." She took a shaky breath. "I was so scared after Mama died. Scared Pa would forget how to love. But you taught him again. You taught all of us." Margaret pulled the girl into an embrace. "Your mother taught me too. Through her notes, through the life she built here. I wouldn't know how to love this family without her example." They held each other in the garden, while the morning sun warmed the earth, and the herbs released their fragrance into the air. That afternoon, Ben rode into town alone. When he returned at dusk, he found Margaret in the schoolhouse organizing books. "I have something for you," he said. He opened his hand to reveal a ring, simple gold band with a small sapphire, modest but beautiful. "It was my mother's. Pa gave it to her when they settled in Wyoming Territory. She wore it for 40 years, through drought and hard winters and everything this land could throw at them. When she died, she left it to me, said to give it to a woman who was tough enough to survive this life." He held it out. "Catherine has her own ring, buried with her. That's how she wanted it. But this one's for you, if you'll have it." Margaret's throat tightened. "It's perfect." He slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all along. "There's something else," Ben said. "I spoke with the territorial registrar, asked about the process for adoption." Margaret's breath caught. "Adoption? For you to legally adopt the children, if you want to. I know you said you're not trying to replace Catherine, and I respect that. But I also know how much these kids mean to you, and I want them to have the security of knowing you're bound to them by more than just my word." Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks. "You'd do that?" "I'd do anything to make you feel like you belong here. Because you do. You're already their family in every way that matters. This would just make it official." Margaret couldn't speak, could only nod. Ben pulled her close. "We'll do it right. Small ceremony, just family and the people who stood with us. Nothing fancy but real. A new beginning for all of us." They stood together in the schoolhouse as the light faded. Two people who'd thought their chances at happiness were behind them, discovering that sometimes the best parts of life arrive when you've stopped looking for them. Over the next 2 weeks, preparations began in earnest. Annie took charge of organizing with the efficiency of a field general. Dutch Peterson volunteered his house for the ceremony. It was larger and could accommodate more guests. The ranchers' wives contributed food. Even Hoskins from the general store offered to close up early so everyone could attend. Margaret wrote to her sister in Philadelphia a letter that tried to explain everything that had happened and why she wouldn't be returning. The response came surprisingly quickly. "I always knew you needed something we couldn't give you. I'm glad you found it. Father would be proud. Mother will come around eventually. Be happy, Margaret. That's what matters." Ben worked from dawn to dusk, pushing to complete the season's work before the ceremony. But now he took breaks to eat meals with the family, to help with evening lessons, to be present. The change was subtle but profound. He'd stopped running from his grief and learned to carry it alongside hope. One evening, a week before the ceremony, Margaret found him in Catherine's old sewing room. She'd rarely entered this space, respecting the boundary of memory. Ben sat in a chair holding a folded quilt, wedding ring pattern, carefully stitched in blues and whites. She made this the year before she died. Said it was for Annie's hope chest, for when she eventually married. Margaret knelt beside him. "It's beautiful." She had such plans. For all of them. College for Caleb if he wanted it. Teaching Annie to manage a household. Watching the little ones grow. His voice thickened. "I'm terrified I'm dishonoring her memory by moving on. Ben, look at me." Margaret waited until he met her eyes. "Catherine loved you, loved this family. Do you honestly think she'd want you to spend the rest of your life alone and miserable?" "No, but no buts. You loved her with everything you had. You grieved her properly, and now you're choosing to live again. That's not dishonor, that's courage." That's exactly what she'd want. He set the quilt aside and pulled Margaret onto his lap, holding her tightly. "How did I get so lucky twice?" "Not luck, choice. You chose to let me in. To let yourself feel again." She kissed his temple. "And I chose to stay, even when it was hard. That's not luck, that's work. The kind that builds something lasting." They sat together in the quiet room, surrounded by memories of a woman neither would forget, making peace with the future they were building. The night before the ceremony, Margaret lay awake listening to the house settle. Tomorrow her entire life would change. She'd become a wife again, a mother figure to 6 children, a permanent part of this land and these people. The fear tried to creep in, old voices insisting she was broken, insufficient, destined to disappoint. But she pushed them aside and thought instead of Sam's laugh when he finally mastered a difficult lesson, of Annie's growing confidence. On the way, Rosie reached for her hand without hesitation, of Ben's eyes when he looked at her, seeing not her failures but her strength. She thought of Catherine's notes in the margins of the teaching book. "See the children as they are, not as you wish they were." And she thought of her own journey, from broken woman fleeing judgment to teacher to partner to whatever she was becoming now. Not mother exactly, but something equally important, equally necessary, someone who chose this family and was chosen in return. In the morning, she rose before dawn and walked out to watch the sunrise paint the mountains gold and rose. The land stretched endlessly, harsh and beautiful, demanding everything and offering no guarantees. But she'd learned that the best things never came with guarantees. They came with work and faith and the courage to believe that broken things could still build something whole. Behind her, the door opened. Ben emerged, drawn by the same restless energy. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together, watching the day break over their land. "Ready?" he asked. Margaret leaned back against his chest, solid and warm and real. "More than I've ever been." And when the sun finally crested the mountains, flooding the valley with light, she felt certain of one undeniable truth. She was exactly where she belonged. The morning of the ceremony arrived with crystalline clarity. One of those rare Montana days when the sky stretched blue and infinite, unmarred by clouds. Margaret woke to find wildflowers on her dresser, picked and arranged by small hands. A note in Annie's careful script read, "For luck and happiness." "We love you." She dressed slowly in the one good dress she owned, deep green wool that Annie had helped her alter the week before. It wasn't a traditional wedding dress, but it suited her. Practical, elegant, honest. She pinned her dark hair up, leaving a few strands to soften her face, and studied her reflection. The woman looking back was different from the one who'd stepped off the stage 4 months ago. That woman had been running, hollow-eyed and uncertain. This woman stood rooted, certain of her place in the world. A knock at the door. "Miss Chen, we're ready when you are." Caleb's voice, steady and respectful. Margaret opened the door to find all 6 children dressed in their Sunday best. Caleb wore a pressed shirt and actually combed hair. Annie had woven ribbons through her braids. The twins looked scrubbed and almost civilized. Sam's boots were polished, and Rosie wore a dress with only minimal dirt smudges, clutching thunder in one hand and a bouquet of sage in the other. "You all look wonderful," Margaret said, her voice catching. "You look pretty," Rosie announced. "Like a queen, but not scary." Margaret laughed and knelt to Rosie's level. "Thank you. That might be the best compliment I've ever received." Sam stepped forward, holding a small, wrapped package. "We made you something, all of us together." Inside was a handkerchief embroidered with uneven stitches, clearly the work of multiple hands with varying skill levels. In the corner they'd stitched, "Our teacher, our family." Margaret pressed it to her chest, overwhelmed. "It's perfect. All of you are perfect. Don't cry," Grace said pragmatically. "You'll get all blotchy and Pa won't want to marry you." "Grace!" Annie hissed, but Margaret laughed again, wiping her eyes. "You're right, no crying. Not yet, anyway." They rode to Dutch Peterson's ranch in the wagon, Margaret seated between Annie and Caleb, while the younger children bounced with barely contained excitement in the back. The September air carried the scent of hay and approaching autumn, that particular sharpness that spoke of seasons turning. Dutch's property was already filled with people when they arrived. It seemed like every rancher within 50 miles had come. Families Margaret had met during the trial, neighbors who'd heard the story, even a few townspeople who'd traveled from the settlement. They'd arranged benches in rows, facing a makeshift altar decorated with pine boughs and more wildflowers. Ben stood near the front, talking with Dutch, but turned when he heard the wagon. His expression transformed when he saw Margaret, pure wonder, mixed with something deeper. He'd shaved, dressed in his one good suit, and looked younger somehow. Less burdened. He crossed to help her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers. "You're beautiful. You clean up well yourself, Mr. Harrison. Last time you'll call me that, I hope. Don't get ahead of yourself." "I haven't said the vows yet." His eyes crinkled with humor. "Getting cold feet." "Freezing." Absolutely terrified, she squeezed his hand. "And completely certain this is right." The circuit preacher, a weathered man named Reverend Walsh, who traveled between settlements, emerged from the house. "Are we ready to begin?" Ben looked at Margaret. She looked at the children gathered around them, at the community that had assembled, at the land stretching beyond, toward mountains that suddenly felt like home rather than exile. "We're ready." They'd decided against a traditional processional. Instead, the whole family walked together toward the altar, Ben and Margaret side by side, children flanking them. A united front, a statement that this wasn't just a marriage, but a reformation of an entire family. The guests rose as they passed, smiling and murmuring blessings. Robert Chen caught Margaret's eye and nodded with paternal approval. The ranchers' wives dabbed at tears. Even Hoskins looked misty-eyed. At the altar, Reverend Walsh opened his worn Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join Benjamin, Nathaniel Harrison, and Margaret Wei Chen in holy matrimony." Margaret felt Ben's hand tighten on hers at the sound. Of her full name, the name she'd kept from her first husband, honoring a love that had been real, even if brief. "Marriage," Walsh continued, "is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. Benjamin and Margaret have asked to speak their own vows." "Benjamin?" Ben turned to face Margaret fully, still holding both her hands. He'd written nothing down, trusting himself to find the words. "Margaret, when you arrived here, I was half a man. going through motions, surviving but not living. I'd convinced myself that was enough, that I didn't deserve more. You proved me wrong. You showed me that grief and joy can coexist, that loving again doesn't diminish what came before, and that family is built through choice as much as blood. His voice steadied. I promise to really see you every day, to value your strength, your intelligence, your stubbornness that drives me mad and keeps me honest. I promise to be present not just here. To build this life with you as partners equals two people who respect each other enough to be honest, even when it's hard. He glanced at the children. I promise to raise these children with you, to let you be exactly who you are to them, not a replacement for what they lost, but something new and equally necessary. And I promise that whatever challenges come, and they will come, we'll face them together. No more running, no more hiding, just us building something that lasts. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, the embroidered one the children had made, and offered it as Margaret's. Tears started flowing despite her best efforts. When she could speak, Margaret began her own vows. Ben, I came to Montana running from people who told me I was broken, who said my worth was tied to something I couldn't give them. I believed them for a long time. But you taught me that worth isn't about what we can produce. It's about who we choose to be. She looked at each child in turn. Annie, Caleb, Luke, Grace, Sam, Rosie, you taught me that family isn't defined by biology. That love is a verb, not a feeling. That showing up day after day and choosing each other is what builds something real. Back to Ben. I promise to challenge you when you need it and support you always. To stand beside you in this work, this life, this impossible, beautiful mess we're creating. I promise to love your children, our children, with everything I have. To teach them, guide them, and let them teach me in return. Her voice grew stronger. I promise that on the days when I'm scared or uncertain or convinced I'm not enough, I'll tell you instead of hiding. And I promise that this ranch, this family, this life, it's not my consolation prize. It's my choice, my joy, my home. She smiled through tears. I promise to be the partner you deserve. Bossy, stubborn, terrible at ranching, but yours completely. Ben laughed, and the sound rippled through the assembled guests. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat, clearly moved. Do you, Benjamin, take Margaret to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. And do you, Margaret, take Benjamin to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Margaret looked into Ben's eyes, this man who'd learned to live again, who'd chosen her despite everything, and felt absolute certainty. I do. The rings? Caleb stepped forward, carrying Catherine's wedding ring on a small cushion. Margaret had initially refused to wear it, but Annie had insisted. Mama would want it worn by someone who loves Pa and us. It shouldn't sit in a drawer. Ben took the ring and slipped it onto Margaret's finger beside his mother's ring. This represents everything Catherine built, the love, the family, the foundation. You're not replacing her. You're continuing what she started. Then Margaret produced a simple gold band she'd had Brennan make from the money left after selling her grandmother's ring. She placed it on Ben's finger. And this represents what we're building, something new that honors the past, but isn't bound by it. Reverend Walsh raised his hands. By the power vested in me by the Montana Territory and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Benjamin, you may kiss your bride. Ben cupped Margaret's face gently and kissed her with a tenderness that made several guests sigh audibly. When they broke apart, both were smiling. Ladies and gentlemen, Walsh announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Harrison. The crowd erupted in cheers. The children rushed forward, Rosie crashing into Margaret's legs, the twins high-fiving each other, Sam hugging Ben, Annie and Caleb exchanging satisfied looks like they'd orchestrated the whole thing. What followed was chaos of the best kind. Tables had been set up laden with food, roasted venison, fresh bread, pies made by a dozen different hands, even a small cake that someone had managed to frost despite the heat. Musicians appeared with a fiddle and guitar, filling the air with lively tunes. Ben and Margaret opened the dancing, though neither were particularly graceful. They moved together stiffly at first, then with growing ease, finding their rhythm. "I can't believe we actually did this," Margaret murmured against his shoulder. "Having regrets already?" "Not even slightly." She pulled back to look at him, just marveling at how different life looks from 4 months ago. Different good or different terrifying? Both. Definitely both. Other couples joined them. Dutch with his wife, Robert Chen dancing with his daughter, even Hoskins coaxed onto the floor by a widow who'd been sweet on him for years. The children ran wild, playing games and stealing sweets when they thought no one was watching. As the afternoon wore on, guests began approaching with gifts. Not store-bought items wrapped in paper, but practical offerings born of necessity and care. The Millers brought preserves to help them through winter. The Rodriguez family contributed a breeding pair of chickens. Someone gave them a set of hand-forged horseshoes. Each gift represented thought, sacrifice, and community. Robert Chen approached with a leather-bound journal. "For recording your family history," he explained. "So the children's children will know where they came from." He looked at Margaret. "And so your story isn't lost the way so many of our stories are." Margaret embraced him. This man who carried the same heritage she did, who understood the particular loneliness of being foreign in a familiar land. "Thank you for everything." As the sun began its descent, Ben and Margaret found themselves alone for a moment near the edge of the celebration. They stood watching their children, because they were their children now, officially and completely, playing in the golden light. "What are you thinking?" Ben asked. Margaret considered. "That life is strange. 6 months ago, I thought my story was over, that I'd failed at the one thing women are supposed to do naturally, and I'd spend the rest of my days making peace with that failure. And now I realize I wasn't failing. I was just walking a different path to the same destination." She leaned into him. "Family isn't about biology. Home isn't about where you were born. Love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, doing the work, and choosing each other even when it's difficult." Ben kissed the top of her head. "You're going to be an excellent ranch wife. I'm going to be a terrible ranch wife. I still can't tell a heifer from a steer. That's what I have Caleb for," she laughed. "Fair enough. I'll handle education and moral guidance. You handle the livestock identification. Deal." He pulled her closer. "Margaret Harrison has a nice sound to it." "Margaret Chen Harrison," she corrected. "I'm keeping both names. Chen for where I came from, Harrison for where I'm going. I wouldn't have it any other way." As dusk deepened, lanterns were lit, casting warm pools of light across the gathering. The children began to tire. Rosie had fallen asleep on Dutch's porch. Sam leaned heavily against Annie. Even the twins had stopped bouncing. "Time to head home," Ben announced. The goodbyes took another hour. Hugs and handshakes, promises to visit, invitations extended. Finally, the Harrison family loaded into their wagon. Ben drove, Margaret beside him. Children piled in the back, wrapped in blankets. The ride home was quiet, peaceful. Stars emerged in the darkening sky, more numerous than Margaret had ever seen in Philadelphia. The wagon wheels creaked steadily, horses knowing the way without guidance. When they reached the ranch, the children were carried to bed without protest. Ben and Margaret stood in the kitchen, suddenly alone in the house that was now legally, officially, undeniably theirs together. "I should check on the children," Margaret said. "They're fine. Annie can handle it." Ben took her hand. "Come with me." He led her outside to the small grove of aspens behind the house. There in the moonlight stood a newly planted sapling, an oak tree, small but sturdy. "I planted it this morning," Ben explained. "Oak doesn't naturally grow at this altitude. It'll take extra care, constant attention, protection from the harsh winters. But if it survives, if we tend it properly, it'll outlive us all. Become something strong and permanent." Margaret understood the symbolism. "Like us, like this family." "Exactly." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them looking at the small tree. "We're planting something here, Margaret. Building something that wasn't here before. It won't be easy. There'll be hard seasons, storms we can't anticipate. But if we do the work, if we protect what we're building, it'll last. They stood together in the quiet night, two people who'd both known loss and learned that grief doesn't disqualify you from joy. It just teaches you to hold it more carefully. Ben, Margaret said softly, thank you. For what? For seeing me. Not the broken parts, not the missing pieces, just me, Margaret, whole in my own way. He turned her to face him. You never needed fixing. You just needed someone to recognize what you already were. They kissed in the shadow of the oak sapling, sealing promises made and promises still to come. Inside, the house waited, full of sleeping children, lived in and imperfect and home. Tomorrow would bring work, lessons to teach, fences to mend, cattle to tend, a life to build day by day. There would be challenges, certainly. Marcus Whitfield's investigation still loomed. Winter would test the ranch's resources. 6 children would need guidance, patience, and more love than seemed possible to give. But tonight, standing under Montana stars with her husband beside her and their family sleeping safe, Margaret finally understood what it meant to be rooted. Not trapped, but grounded. Not limited, but focused. She'd come west running from judgment and found purpose instead. Come seeking escape and found home. Come believing she was broken and discovered she'd been whole all along, just waiting for the right place, the right people, the right moment to reveal it. Some stories don't end with grand gestures or dramatic transformations. Some just take root slowly, putting down foundations in hard ground, growing despite harsh conditions into something unexpected and beautiful. This was one of those stories, and it was only just beginning. Years later, when the oak tree stood tall enough to shade the porch and the children had grown into adults with families of their own, they would gather here and tell the story of how their father remarried. Our teacher from Philadelphia became the heart of their family. How love wasn't about replacing what was lost, but about having the courage to build something new from the pieces that remained. But on this night, this first night of their new beginning, none of that was written yet. There was only the present moment. 2 people, 6 children, 1 struggling ranch, and the shared faith that together they could make it work. Sometimes that's all you need. Faith, work, and the willingness to choose each other every single day. The rest writes itself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.